The gloves are off. America is using unprecedented economic warfare, really focusing its might to choke Russian oil revenue, and you can see the shockwaves already hitting global markets. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today, well, it's clear, we're unpacking this incredibly volatile mix of U.S. foreign policy threats, huge congressional action, and the instantly reactive global energy markets. And we're filtering all of this through a very distinct political lens, one that sees these aggressive moves not just as options, but as absolutely necessary strategic leverage.
Yeah, and you can feel that pressure immediately. The news hook for us is simple, but profound. Crude oil and gasoline prices are sharply higher today, and that jump, it's based almost entirely on the speculation, the risk being priced in, that President Trump might actually announce these really tough sanctions on Russia. This isn't just, empty political talk anymore. The market's reaction tells you this is seen as a clear, decisive shift in U.S. strategy towards overwhelming force, really.
And the numbers being tossed around in Washington are, well, they're genuinely staggering. We're seeing proposals that include tariffs as high as 500%, not 50, not 100, 500%. Aimed squarely at our supposed trade partners, nations like India and China, if they dare keep buying Russian energy. Senator Lindsey Graham called it an economic bunker buster. And yeah, that feels about right. This is maximum pressure, like right now.
It really is the definition of a hawkish approach, and the source material shows the U.S. is moving away from maybe any perceived leniency straight to coercion. It's designed to cripple Russia's income. The whole point, the narrow focus here, is forcing a ceasefire deal with Moscow, and time is definitely not on their side. President Trump has reportedly given President Putin a tight deadline. Just 50 days, they're saying. Strike a deal or face the most extreme options.
Okay. Let's unpack the specific economic weapons on the table.
Right.
Because they do differ in scope and severity, and that difference really matters to the market.
Right. So we basically have two main lines of attack. First, there's the executive threat. President Trump mentioning these very tough secondary tariffs on countries buying Russian oil, penalties potentially hitting 100%. These are tariffs designed to make Moscow's oil sales just completely unprofitable for their major buyers.
Wait, hang on. Let me make sure we define that mechanism clearly for you listening in. We keep saying secondary sanctions. How do those actually work? Why are they so much more powerful than primary ones, which just target Russia directly?
That's a really good question, because secondary sanctions are like the real nuclear option here. Essentially, they punish any country or any foreign bank, any company that keeps doing business with the primary target, in this case Russia, against U.S. policy. Think of it like this. The U.S. cuts off foreign banks that handle Russian oil sales from access to the dollar system, to U.S. financial markets, which are crucial. And since almost all global trade, especially oil, uses U.S. dollars, well, those foreign banks and businesses are forced to choose. Do they want to keep trading with the entire global U.S. dollar financial system, or do they want to keep buying Russian oil? These sanctions basically force their hand. They have to move away immediately to avoid crippling financial penalties themselves.
Okay, that makes the 100% threat sound incredibly powerful. But the congressional move, that's the one with the number that just jumps off the page,
Okay.
500%. We're talking about the Sanctioning Russia Act of 2025, S.1241.
Yes, and the political momentum behind this is, well, it's astonishing. This isn't some fringe idea. It's co-sponsored by a bipartisan supermajority, at least 81 senators. That kind of consensus signals serious intent.
But a 500% tariff, 5 times the value of the import, on goods from nations like China and India if they buy Russian energy. I mean, doesn't that sound so extreme? It's almost unserious. Isn't that basically guaranteeing a global trade war that America would also lose?
And that's the critical point the market is wrestling with right now. That 500% tariff, it's likely not meant for full implementation. It's designed as maximum political leverage. It's telling China and India, look, we are not bluffing. Congress has the political will to potentially destroy your access to our markets if you keep funding Putin's war machine. It's economic brinkmanship, designed to compel compliance through the fear of just catastrophic loss. And it targets nations buying Russian oil, natural gas, petroleum products, or uranium, too.
And the U.S. isn't just focusing on nations. They're going after the specific companies that keep Russia's income flowing. They've actually named Rosneft PJSC and Lukoil PJSC.
Exactly. Targeting those two is highly strategic. Rosneft and Lukoil together account for nearly half of Russia's crude oil exports. That's about 2.2 million barrels per day. Why them? Because they're central to Russia's supply chain. They're major players who rely on global financing, global logistics. Shutting down that much volume through effective secondary sanctions on their buyers would squeeze the entire Russian economy, hard and fast. The aim is to leave President Putin with, well, basically no other option but to agree to talks within that 50-day window.
Right. So this high-stakes strategy, it creates immediate waves in the energy markets. We talked about volatility. These aggressive policy threats drive that volatility. You get this intense duality. The aggressive policy pushing prices up versus this broader economic fear that maybe pulls them down a bit.
That's the core tension defining global energy prices right now. Absolutely. On the bullish side, where risk gets priced in, just the speculation alone, the idea of sanctions on Russian energy causes sharp price increases. Traders are moving preemptively. And then you have real geopolitical risks layered on top. Houthi rebels attacking ships in the Red Sea that boosts freight rates, insurance costs dramatically. Plus, Ukrainian drone attacks temporarily halting loadings at key Black Sea ports. All of that supports significantly higher crude prices.
But if these aggressive sanctions are basically guaranteed to cut supply and raise prices, what's the major bearish factor? What's keeping a lid on a complete, uncontrolled price explosion?
What's fascinating here is the sheer market skepticism, and it really comes down to a political calculation. Oil traders seem to believe that the more extreme the threat, especially that 500% tariff, the less likely Washington is to actually let it be fully implemented.
Why? Why are they so confident policymakers won't pull the trigger?
Because Washington knows. They know that effective secondary sanctions, particularly the 100% or, God forbid, the 500% kind, would cause global energy prices to soar, just dramatically. And that price surge, it translates instantly into severe domestic inflation. It directly harms American consumers and, infuriates voters right before a major election cycle. So the market is betting that the political calculation of self-preservation, avoiding that domestic pain, will probably outweigh the ideological aggression needed to fully implement sanctions that would truly destroy Russia's oil income.
So essentially, the market sees these extreme threats not as a definite policy coming down the line, but more like a negotiating tactic. And that political calculation acts as a significant bearish offset, keeping prices from spiraling totally out of control, at least for now.
Precisely. And this is sort of compounded by broader physical supply concerns, too. We're seeing mounting worries about a global oil glut because of increased output forecasts. The International Energy Agency, the IEA, for instance, they forecast a surplus equivalent to about 1.5% of global consumption in Q4. It's a supply cushion. Maybe small, but it's there against the political firestorm.
So the challenge for energy forecasting isn't just simple supply and demand anymore. It's almost entirely about predicting if the U.S. president's dramatic statements, often called exaggerated, are genuine policy intentions or just sophisticated negotiating tools to hit that tough 50-day deadline.
Yeah, you're analyzing political resolve, not just geology, but this unpredictability is actually key to the conservative approach being discussed here. Overwhelming force must be demonstrated, the thinking goes, to compel compliance. The strategy implies, look, we have to be willing to risk some domestic discomfort to achieve the primary foreign policy goal.
Right, and that's the critical transition point.
Right.
Why does Washington feel the need to deploy such, nuclear economic options? It seems to go back to the underlying political conviction driving this aggressive foreign policy, and it's directly linked to a broader conservative domestic narrative. It feels like a holistic view of threats, both external and internal.
Absolutely. That hawkish foreign policy, the willingness to be this tough, this decisive on Russia, it's amplified by influential conservative media platforms. You mentioned the Blaze, Daily Caller, the Epoch Times, and it's framed alongside these existential ideological battles happening at home. That feeling of being under siege domestically, it directly justifies the need for overwhelming force abroad in this view.
How exactly do these platforms connect those dots for their audience? How do they link, say, sanctions on Russia to domestic issues?
Well, they connect foreign aggression to what they portray as foundational domestic threats. Take the border, for example. Illegal immigration is often framed not just as a policy issue needing reform, but as an existential threat. Some sources argue it's meant to collapse country from within, and that U.S. laws prioritize the best interests of illegal aliens above Americans. Now, if you genuinely believe your country is being intentionally collapsed from within, well, that provides the ideological foundation for demanding the most aggressive, decisive action possible on all fronts.
That narrative certainly reinforces the idea that threats are existential. And that decisive action, even if it's risky, is always the necessary response. You also see this framing in the discussion of political violence against conservative figures.
Yes, there's significant reporting focused on what's described as the shocking assassination of prominent conservative Charlie Kirk. And it explicitly attributes the act to leftists who, quote, have supposedly become the monsters they decry. This kind of reporting really elevates political disagreement into something resembling an existential war, which then justifies overwhelming counterforce.
It's a powerful framing mechanism, isn't it? Portraying the opposition, whether domestic or foreign, not just as ideological rivals, but as destructive forces. Forces that need to be aggressively countered using every tool available, including these economic bunker busters.
And we see that extended to cultural issues too, right?
Exactly. The source material highlights deep concern over wokeness, destroying classic American institutions, even things like Shakespeare, and consistently condemns Antifa as the violent face of far-left terror. These domestic cultural battles are linked together with the need for strong foreign policy, forming this kind of unified message. And that connection is often cemented directly by political leaders themselves. Former President Trump actively amplifies these domestic conservative narratives, personally sharing the work of journalists on Truth Social. It creates that unified message. Aggressive foreign action, focused on strength, is necessary because America is simultaneously under siege from destructive forces both at home and abroad. That's the narrative.
And it creates a kind of mandate for the current strategy. If the stakes are perceived to be that high, then the risks that come with sanctions, like rising inflation or trade disruption, they become sort of acceptable collateral damage, necessary evils in the pursuit of absolute security and compliance.
So what does this all mean for you listening in? America's foreign policy is now operating on these extreme high-stakes threats, using massive financial penalties as leverage to achieve a hard deadline. This unpredictability instantly moves billions in the energy market. It forces compliance through the sheer weight of economic consequences.
Yeah, for you, the learner, the volatility you see in the global markets, that's a direct mirror of the deliberate policy uncertainty being manufactured by Washington. This strategy absolutely risks soaring global energy prices, yes. But in the view of its proponents, this decisive, overwhelming approach offers the fastest route to forcing an adversary's compliance, a route they deem necessary to preserve American strength.
And this leads us to a final provocative thought for you to explore. We know these sanctions are meant to weaken Russia, but considering that a bipartisan majority of Congress seems ready to levy a 500% tariff on trade partners like India and China if they continue buying Russian oil, what happens to America's own economic network? To global trade stability? If Congress decides that defending an ideological position, that need for overwhelming decisive action, is ultimately more important than preventing a potential worldwide trade collapse, go explore that calculation, that balance between risk and ideology.